right, this is an interview at, whoops,
Okay,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
This is an interview at the Beltrone Living Center, Colony, New York, the 5th of August, 2003, approximately 11 a.m. Interviewers are Mike Russert and Wayne Clark. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
My full name is Aileene Brazeal, Sweetser. My date of birth is January the 4th, 1919, and I was born in Hobart, Indiana.
Okay. Now what was your educational background prior to joining the American Red Cross?
I was a school teacher in Indianapolis. I had gone to what is now the University of Indianapolis.
Okay. Do you recall where you were and your remembrances about when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Oh yes, definitely. I was out on a date, as were most people, and of course it was a horrible sort of thing. We could not believe this had actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that was in 1941, and most of my friends subsequently were drafted. At that time, the college I went to was, we had compulsory chapel, and we were seated alphabetically. I was, since my surname was Brazeal, I was between Barker and Brenneman. It wiped out most of the men.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Why did you make a decision to...
Most of my friends went into the service.
Mm-hmm.
And a close friend with whom I taught, who's still a very good friend, she and I decided we would join actually we were going to join the SPARs. They took her, they did not take me because I was too short.
Now, what were the spars?
That was the Coast Guard.
Okay.
And she became an officer in the Coast Guard, was stationed in Boston. We've had an interesting connection all these years. We had gone to elementary school together, to high school, to college. We both taught school in Indianapolis. We both joined the service. And strangely enough, when I came back from the service, I realized we always kept in touch that she had met a man in Lynn and I had met a man overseas. Actually, I met him in Boston Harbor on the boat going over. And both of us married and found out to our surprise that our husbands had gone to school at Tufts together.
Really?
And we both lived in the Boston area,
Okay.
and so we kept in touch.
Okay. When you joined the Red Cross, did they give you any kind of specialized training?
Yes, they did. They
What
sent
kind
us
of
to
training?
Washington, and I believe it was the American University, and we had, we were supposed to have at least 2 weeks training. For some reason, they considered me a recreation worker. They had a social worker, a staff aide, and a variety of positions. East Hospital had 5 Red Cross employees. For some strange reason, they pulled me out practically immediately and said, "We think you're qualified. You don't need any more training." And they said, get all your gear together. Don't tell anybody where you're going. And we have a ticket for you to Boston, and a reservation at the Copley Plaza. Don't call your parents. Someone will pick you up and contact you. And I left immediately on the train. Of course, my footlocker, and went to the wrong station. I didn't know anything about Boston at that time. And someone did call me about 4:30 the next morning. I had arrived about midnight. A Red Cross official took me down to Taunton, which was a staging area in Massachusetts. And I was there for about 3 days before we shipped out. Apparently another Red Cross had been assigned to that unit and backed out. And it was, around the D-Day. And I went over on the SS America, which was the largest American ship afloat at that time had been converted to a troop ship. And I think I have some pictures on board. We were
Well,
so
we can
crowded.
show those after,
We were
at
so
the end.
crowded that we couldn't all stand in the stateroom, stand on the floor in the stateroom at the same time because the bunks, you turn over and you hit your hip on the next bunk above. But it was a 5-day crossing.
Did you go in a convoy or a single?
No,
single
unfortunately, we did not. We went alone.
Mhm.
And it was a 5-day crossing. Went to Liverpool.
Now, how many Red Cross personnel were on board ship?
Probably 25 because there were 5 complete hospital units on board. Nothing else but hospital units. And we had no idea what where we would be sent. There was no information. Got off in Liverpool and we took a train to London, and by that time we were really surprised. We knew the manned bombers had stopped coming over, but we're really kind of shocked to find out that the V1s and the V2s, V1s particularly at that time, they were the ones which made the noise, and we could hear them coming. But they would come over. We were built in London about a block in from Hyde Park, and they would come over about every 15 minutes.
Where did you go to escape them?
Well, we would run, when we would hear the alarm, we would run down the stairway, and then we would run out on the street. A lot of people slept in the subways, the underground at that time. It was completely blacked out in London, and yet the taxis went, you could get a taxi any place without a light. It whizzes around London like everything. And the people were very stoic about it.
What were your relationships like with the English people? Did you have much
very
contact?
good. Very good. We didn't have a whole lot of, dealings with the people because we were, it took us probably a week or two to find our hospital. We would go down to headquarters every day, and they just simply couldn't find where our hospital had gone. And when we finally joined our hospital, it was 103rd. I was with the 103rd for quite a while.
Now, what were your duties there?
Well, we had lots of supplies, which we sent around to, took around to the wards. We had also maintained a recreation hall, and the patients who were ambulatory would come to the hall. We had card tables, musical instruments, snooker tables, which are very much like pool tables. And we had all sorts of supplies for men who could, wanted any kind of craft work to work on. We had all sorts of supplies. On the wards, we distributed such things as toothpaste and toothbrushes and shaving cream and combs and that sort of thing, and paper. And we listened to a lot of sad stories.
Okay. Did you stay in England during the entire
No,
time?
I was ultimately transferred to another hospital down in Warminster, and I remember living in a tent there. From there, when the war was winding down, and they were going to divide up Germany, I was sent to Paris. And I initially was supposed to go to Stuttgart, but the Allies were wrangling over how they were going to divide up Germany, and I actually ended up first going and living in an old castle in Neuchâtel, then going to a hospital out near Soissons, which is up near Reims. After that, I went to Aix-en-Provence in the 235th hospital, and toward the end of the war, I was up in Wiesbaden.
Did you have similar duties at these hospitals?
Yes.
Or? Were they mostly Americans that were in the hospital, or?
Oh yes, mostly Americans. We did have at one time in England. We did have, I think, either 4 or 5 Russians who had been. Actually, they were very sad, They had been captured by the Germans and sent back into France. And before the link-up of the Americans and the Russians, they had sent them to England. They were all sick.
Mhm.
The sad part about it, they were just kids, 14. One of them had TB. I think one had an amputation. They were frightened to death. Sure, if they got back to Russia, they'd be shot. We had a lot of sad cases of. We had a lot of sad cases of Americans. Strangely enough, it was an open society. There wasn't the color bar, in England that we had here in the United States. Had a lot of venereal disease, a lot of syphilis, a lot of gonorrhea. And the other thing that we had a lot of, when the weather became very cold, on the continent, we had wards and wards of trench foot. Nobody's ever heard of trench foot. These young men had been, in the trenches with their feet wet. They were cold. A lot of them lost toes, feet, sometimes part of their limb. They were very sad. The smell of those wards is still, I remember.
Now, were you quartered with,
I was quartered with the Red Cross, and we were quartered
it was strictly,
with the Red Cross. We had a little unit there, but we were, and basically in other situations, we lived with the nurses. And we had an assimilated rank of a second lieutenant in case of capture.
Now, what did you wear? Did you wear
We had a uniform.
uniforms?
We had several different types. We had a working uniform, which is a gray seersucker. We had a summer uniform, which is very much like you've seen Red Cross people. Here's kind of a pale blue. We had winter uniforms, which were an Oxford gray. It was pretty standard.
now did you get like pay that was comparable to the military, or?
Well, probably not.
No.
No. I don't remember what we received in compensation.
Okay. Now, you said you met the gentleman you eventually married.
Right. I met him on the boat in Boston Harbor. And it was kind of unique because I thought I would never see him again, but actually he was in the same hospital that came back in that.
Was he in the Army?
Oh yes, he was, and he was a second lieutenant maybe at that time. I don't know. I don't remember what it was. He was doing anesthesiology at the hospital, and it was over a year later that I married him. It was when when I was in Paris and doing nothing except waiting for an assignment, that I found out that I could hitch. There was no transportation back and forth between, commercial transportation. I found out that I could get back to England and get married while I was waiting for an assignment. The Red Cross gave me permission, and I went out to Orley Field, which was just a field then, with farmhouses around, and waited in an abandoned house for 2 nights. And finally, these jaunty Air Corps, I guess it was Air Corps,
Yes,
at that time, came over and said, "Want to ride back to England?" And I said, "Sure." So I hauled myself out and got in a stripped-down 47, not C-47 that they used for jumps. And I hadn't realized that they were a different breed than the rest of the Army. They had no fear, They had stocked up on Calvados and French champagne and the works, and we had no sooner gotten aloft than they started drinking. They took the door off the plane. They stuffed the notes in the bottle. They would lean out. It wasn't a pressurized plane. Toss these things out in the channel. I thought, my God, I'll never get there. Got to London. It was foggy, and they took me up in the Midlands someplace and landed. I have a picture someplace. He said, "Well, since you're going back to get married, you ought to have your shoes shined." And I have a picture of them shining my shoes.
When did you return to the United States?
I returned in the spring of 46.
Now, I know you were with the Red Cross, but did you get any benefits like a GI Bill or anything like that at all?
No.
Did you stay in contact with anyone that you...
No. There was a mixture always going on, replacements. And I never kept in touch with any of them.
How long did you stay with the Red Cross?
I went in the spring of, I'd been teaching in Indianapolis and I resigned probably in May and came back probably in maybe May or June in 46, I mean 44 to 46.
How do you think your time in the service affected your life besides finding your husband?
Would open my eyes to the world because we did have an opportunity. You know, I did see, I had never been abroad at that time. I saw a lot of England at that time. I saw a lot of France. My husband had not traveled either, and it opened my eyes to the rest of the world, and since then I've traveled on all the continents except Antarctica.
Oh, really?
I've seen a lot of Africa, most of South America, and Asia, Egypt, and went to Afghanistan a few years back.
Really?
Wow.
Now, I see you worked at Ellis Hospital, so
Right,
you changed your career then, too.
right.
Do you have some pictures you want to show us?
Well, I mean, if you,
No, yes,
Sure.
we can put them on tape if you hold them up to...
well, I'll tell you, if you have time, I'll tell you a little story.
Sure.
While I was in England, you know, I met lots of different people, but when we were closing up the 103rd, strangely enough, I remember specific patients, even though I had no personal relationship with them. And when we were closing up the 103rd, there was a young man, I recognized him from his accent. He was from the Midwest, and I had a Midwestern accent too. And he was always drawing things, all little cartoon things. And when some of them, I asked if I could have them, and we would just be tossing them away. And he said, "Oh, sure." So I packed these things up and lugged them around. And when I closed up my house in Skeena, I found this box of these posters. And I looked at the name. I'd forgotten the name completely. And I asked my daughter to look him up on the internet. And he's an art critic.
Really?
And so I wrote him a little note. Maybe I'll hear from him in the next, next few days. Oh, shucks, I can get all that stuff out. Well, this is the little note that I wrote to him. These are the posters. And I think since he's an art critic, he might like to have them. His name is Carl Moehl, Moehl, and he is,
Okay, I got it.
Okay, there's another one. Oh, no, a couple more.
there are 5 of them altogether.
5, okay.
Mhm.
Now, where is he living now?
His office apparently is in Chicago, Illinois.
Okay, got it.
They're little whimsical type things. He's the art critic with the New Art Examiner.
Okay, got it.
So when did you contact him?
I sent it off yesterday, actually.
Oh.
Okay, got it.
this is what I wrote. Are you showing me to read it?
Sure.
It says, it's to Carl Mole, art critic, new art examiner, and he's at 314 West Institute Place in Chicago, Illinois. And it's your early work, England, 1944. Dear Carl, I remember you. Do you remember me? Finding 5 pieces of your early work not long ago when I cleaned out my attic in Schenectady, New York, startled me. As an American Red Cross worker assigned to the 103rd General Hospital in Ludgershall, England, I clearly was impressed with your whimsical posters, and even then you would probably someday make your mark in the art world. How strange it is that some memories, so very transient and seemingly unimportant, remain so vivid. I can still picture you as a fresh-faced kid, possibly 18 or 19 years old. Also in my memories that you were from the Midwest, possibly Illinois or Iowa, and that you had the same Midwestern accent that I had. I grew up in Indianapolis. I said such things as fixing dinner. You said making dinner. I had been a school teacher in Indianapolis before joining the Red Cross, and although art was not my subject, it was something of interest to me. We had no personal relationship or involvement with each other whatsoever. When either I left or you left for later assignments, I asked for some of your posters at some point, and at some point shipped them home, discovering them not long ago. You might even have made the wooden box they were shipped in, and you might have been the one who made a second footlocker for me. I still have both. I went on to other assignments in France and Germany, and you no doubt returned home safely. Life has been good, and we both have much to be thankful for. What this letter is about is that I would like to send the posters to you if you are interested. They are a part of your successful journey through life. Isn't it great to still be alive? And then I just signed it. I said, a small Xerox picture of myself and the man I later married, taken at the 103rd. He was doing anesthesiology at that time, but later became a psychiatrist. We were married for 55 years. And so he wouldn't think I was scanning him. I just sent a few of these along. But I gather he has written many things about art, both from various periods, the Vietnam War as well, because this is what my daughter had found. So he must.
That's very interesting. Now, do you have any photographs of you?
Oh yeah, I have several photographs of various things. This is one. While I was in Paris doing nothing and waiting, they called me one day and asked if I could drive a shift, a 3 or 4 speed vehicle, and I said, "Oh sure, I was sure I could drive it." So the Americans had several mobile medical, what did they call them? I forgot, mobile units, and they were giving them to the French. And so we had a parade. I've lost the picture of all these things lined up somehow with the Eiffel Tower in the background. But General de Gaulle was there, and they took this. You know, at those times we had no television, and they printed these things and put them in bank windows.
If you hold it up in front of you, Wayne can copy that. Now, is that you?
This one is me, and this is the French Red Cross girl.
Let me just get the text in.
General de Gaulle shook our hand.
Oh, really?
We went to a cocktail party. We couldn't speak French. They couldn't speak English. So we had a glass of champagne, they blew a whistle, and we all went home.
Okay, thank you.
Any other photos?
Oh, I have lots of them, but you probably wouldn't be interested in them. I just brought us up the sampling of them. And the Red Cross, you know, did other things. These are some Red Cross pictures that were. This is one of
Or
the
photograph showing what the Red Cross did.
This is one of the wards, you know, in the hospital. It's we're very close together.
Okay, got it.
I could probably have some of these copied if we want to do it that way.
These are all hospital things. This is just a little one too. These are the Air Corps kids that shined my shoes when they landed me up in England.
Okay, got it.
This is some of the typical, destruction that we, that we saw. We had prisoners once we got on the continent working for us sometimes.
Now, is that your unit or the group you were with?
This was the operating room unit.
Mm-hmm.
I just have many of these things that you probably aren't interested in at all. When I went back to England to get married, I was married by the registrar who had an office above the bank. And it was I had to fill out a paper that was about saying long, and he never got up from his desk at all. He filled out this long form, asked us a million questions about who our mother and fathers were, and what their employment was, and where they were born. And then he turned to me and he said, "And your condition, ma'am?" I looked at my husband and he looked at me, and Mr. Mole was his name. Mr. Mole. He finally says, "Spinster?" So when he asked my husband, he knew he was a bachelor. So, yeah. I don't want to bore you with this.
I'd like to make some copies of these.
You can look
Okay,
through any of these.
They've got a copy machine down here.
Yeah, Okay.
Now, do you have any of you at all?
Oh, sure.
Besides having your shoes shined here.
Yeah, sure.
have
I
that
think
one.
I'd have some in here. Right. Let's see. That's my husband and myself. Let's see. Like that and my husband when we got married. I have to have some others in here. This is the group I was with I'm in this one right here. I'm not that vain to have a lot of myself. Yeah, here's one of myself, and riding on a train. And,
Okay, I'm going to get these copied.
oh, you can copy any of these that
And
you
then
want.
we'll get these and
Okay, whatever you want.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
This is the end?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, okay, well,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Okay.